My name is Evelyn Hart, and I am 67 years old. I live in the same small Midwestern town where my grandparents settled nearly a century ago. My days are quiet now, gardening in the mornings, a long walk in the afternoons, and classical music humming through every corner of my little home. I often say that peace is something you cultivate slowly, like basil or tomatoes. It doesn't sprout overnight. But peace, I've learned, can be disturbed very quickly. My grandmother, Margaret, passed away 12 years ago. She was the anchor of our family, the kind of woman who kept meticulous handwritten ledgers of every bill, every birthday gift, every donation. She believed in order, in preparedness, in legacy. When she died, she left behind her small farmhouse, the one she and my grandfather had bought in 1948 for a sum so modest it almost feels mythical today. That farmhouse, and the 5 acres surrounding it, became the shared property of her descendants, myself and my brother's 2 children, my niece and nephew, Jenna and Marcus. They were in their late 20s at the time, ambitious and eager to climb life's ladders. I remember thinking that grandmother's house would be safe with them, even cherished. I was wrong about many things, but that one hurt the most. Still, for a decade, nothing much happened. We paid the annual property tax as a family, alternating years. It was an easy system until both Jenna and Marcus moved away, first temporarily, then permanently. They had lives now in Atlanta and Chicago, respectively. The farmhouse, to them, was a sentimental trinket at best and a burdensome relic at worst. But there was one thing in that house they never forgot about: Grandma's jewelry. Margaret's jewelry box was full of old pieces, pearls from her 25th anniversary, a sapphire ring she received when my grandfather returned from World War II, a brooch shaped like a swallow, and a collection of fine gold that she had accumulated slowly, deliberately. None of it was extravagant, but each piece carried history, and history has a weight of its own. I treasured those items not for their monetary value but for the quiet stories behind them. Yet I was outnumbered. As an unmarried woman without children, I was often treated as the emotionally attached one, the one who should be gently excused from decisions involving realistic, financial matters. I tried not to take offense. But one Tuesday morning, while watering my rosemary, I received a group text from Jenna. "Hey Aunt Ev, Marcus and I talked. We're going to divide Grandma's jewelry this weekend while we're in town. Shouldn't take long. See you Saturday." Just like that. No discussion. No invitation to contribute. No respect for the emotional gravity of what they were handling. I stared at the message for a long time. My fingers trembled, not because of anger, but because of the cold realization that something had shifted. They weren't considering me anymore, not as an equal inheritor, not even as an elder deserving courtesy. They were treating me like an afterthought. That evening, while sitting alone at my kitchen table, I opened my folder of property documents. I'd been preparing to pay the annual taxes for our shared property, as it was my year to do so, at least according to the old system. But I had an uneasy sense that something else was brewing beneath the surface. There was a smell in the air. Trouble has a scent, subtle but unmistakable. I didn't know yet just how deeply my niece and nephew had mismanaged things. Or what their carelessness would cost them, or me. But I sensed a reckoning approaching. And I felt, with a strange calmness, that I would need to be ready. The night before their visit, I told myself one simple truth. People reveal their character when they believe no one is watching. I just didn't expect the revelation to be quite so dramatic. And when Saturday came, it became clear that they weren't just after Grandma's jewelry. They were after something much bigger. Jenna and Marcus arrived at the farmhouse on a bright Saturday morning in early June. Birds were chirping, the air was mild, and everything seemed deceptively peaceful. I met them on the porch, offering the same gentle smile I'd worn for decades. They barely noticed. "Let's just get this over with," Jenna muttered, brushing past me as if I were a coat rack. She had always been efficient, almost aggressively so. Marcus, taller and more reserved, gave a half-hearted nod. Inside the living room, the old jewelry box sat on the coffee table, right where Grandma had kept it in her final years. I had placed it there earlier, handling it like a sacred artifact. But the moment my niece snapped open the lid, reverence evaporated. Okay, she said briskly. We'll split things by value. Value? I asked softly. Well, yeah, Marcus replied. What else would we go by? I mean, this stuff is worth real money. I swallowed. Grandma would have wanted us to consider sentimental value as well. Jenna rolled her eyes. Sentimental doesn't pay bills, Aunt Ev. The words stung more than I expected. They began dividing the pieces with a cold, almost clinical efficiency. Jenna wanted the pearls, because they photograph well. Marcus claimed the sapphire ring, because sapphires are trending again. They left the swallow brooch for me, declaring it old-fashioned. I watched in silence. It wasn't worth arguing, their minds were already made up. But something felt off. Their urgency was palpable, too sharp, too frantic for a simple family division. That's when the real betrayal hit. Marcus cleared his throat. So, we're thinking of selling the farmhouse. I blinked. Selling it? Without discussing it with me? We're discussing it now, Jenna said crisply. We're drowning financially. Marcus has student loans. I've got credit card debt. Selling the land would fix a lot. But the property has been in our family for generations, I protested. That's sentimental again, she snapped. The land isn't profitable. It's just sitting here costing us money. Taxes, upkeep, insurance. I inhaled slowly. I paid the taxes last year. And all the years before that. Marcus shook his head. No, you didn't. I felt the world tilt. Excuse me? The county sent us notices, he explained. Apparently the property taxes haven't been paid in 3 years. My voice faltered. That's impossible. I paid them when it was my turn. Did either of you pay them during your years? Jenna stiffened. We thought you were handling it. All 3 years? She stayed silent. I realized then what had happened. They had forgotten. Completely. And the county must have been sending the notices to their old addresses because neither of them updated their information. How much is owed? I asked quietly. Marcus hesitated. Nearly $7,000. I closed my eyes. And the county is threatening to auction the property if it's not paid soon, Jenna added, folding her arms. Which is another reason we should just sell before we lose it. A heavy stillness filled the room. They had ignored their responsibilities, neglected the legacy left to us, and now wanted to liquidate it to cover their own mistakes. Then Jenna delivered the cruelest blow. So here's the deal, she said. We want you to agree to the sale. And we want you to sign the paperwork today. It's better for everyone. I looked at their faces, young, impatient, entitled. They weren't asking for cooperation. They were demanding surrender. And they believed I was fragile enough to comply. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because while they were splitting Grandma's jewelry, I had quietly prepared something far more powerful than sentimental attachments. Before I confronted them, I needed to understand something deeper, the roots of this betrayal, and the tangled history that shaped us. My brother, their father, had passed away suddenly from a heart attack when he was only 52. It had been a devastating blow. I stepped in often afterward, helping with bills, babysitting, even paying for Jenna's summer music program 1 year and Marcus's first used car. They remembered none of that now. Over time, distance grew, not out of malice but inertia. Their mother remarried and moved away. I stayed behind, tending to the old house, checking its pipes during winter freezes, trimming the hedges out front. I didn't mind. I loved the place. It was like caring for a quiet old friend. Grandma Margaret had always trusted me with the details. She once said, "Evelyn, you're the steady one. You notice what others overlook." At the time, I thought she meant it kindly. Later I learned it was a responsibility, not a compliment. When she died, she left the jewelry equally to all three of us but noted that the house should remain in the family, as long as it is cherished. She didn't define cherished. Perhaps she assumed we all understood the word the same way. I cherished it through consistency. Jenna and Marcus cherished it through nostalgia. But nostalgia doesn't mow lawns or pay taxes. Years earlier, I had tried to teach them about property obligations. I even mailed them calendar reminders. But their replies were always vague. We'll get to it soon. Life is hectic. Just pay it this year, Aunt Ev. They were children then, young adults, technically, but still children in responsibility and foresight. I forgave it because we all grow at different speeds. But now? Now they were in their 30s, and they had arrived with demands, not discussions. I sat at the farmhouse dining table as they bickered in the next room, their voices low but heated. They blamed each other for the tax oversight. They blamed me too, in whispered barbs they thought I couldn't hear. She should have told us. She babysits that house like it's her child. Honestly, she should have just taken care of the taxes. She's retired. Their assumptions were astonishing. The more I listened, the more I understood their motives. They were desperate, financially stressed, emotionally frazzled, and drenched in entitlement. They wanted quick relief, not long-term stewardship. But the farmhouse was not a liquid asset. It was a legacy soaked in sweat and memory and permanence. I thought of Grandma's ledger books, the careful rows of numbers, the tiny annotations in her looping script. She believed that the way a family handles its property reflects the way it handles its values. Listening to my niece and nephew, I realized something painful. They weren't villains. They were simply unequipped, raised in a world of convenience, used to bailing out of commitments when life got complicated. And in their desperation, they had turned on the one person who had always shown them steady care. I decided then that my revenge, if we can even call it that, would not be rooted in cruelty. It would be rooted in clarity, accountability, and truth. They needed to learn that inheritance is not a windfall. It is a responsibility. And I would teach them, not by lecturing, but by allowing reality to unfold in front of them with undeniable precision. Because what they didn't know yet was this. The county tax deadline was in 2 days. And I had already paid every cent, quietly, efficiently, and legally. But they would discover that in a way they never expected. And that discovery would change everything. After listening to their whispered arguments, I excused myself and walked out to the old mudroom, which I had converted into a small document storage area. My folders were neatly arranged, labeled in clean black ink. I had every receipt, every payment, every property record dating back to the year my grandparents first signed the deed. I pulled out the folder titled Property Tax, Year 12, the most recent one. Inside was the receipt stamped by the county 3 weeks earlier. $7,288, paid in full. And beside it, a letter from the county assessor confirming my payment. They hadn't received the earlier notices because the county had been sending them to out-of-date addresses. I discovered that during my phone call to the assessor's office. The clerk, a kind woman named Sheila, apologized profusely and suggested I file a primary contact update, which I did. While Jenna and Marcus planned to gather Grandma's jewelry, I had been gathering facts. I returned to the living room where they now stood side by side, arms crossed, bracing for resistance. "All right," I said gently. "Let's go through this step by step." "We don't have time for step by step," Jenna said. "We just need your signature." "Before I sign anything," I replied, "you're going to help me understand what exactly you think is happening." Marcus sighed dramatically. "We're about to lose the property if the taxes aren't paid. So selling now makes the most financial sense." "And if I refuse?" I asked. "Well," Jenna said, "then you'd be responsible for the entire tax bill on your own. And honestly, that's not fair. We're all co-owners." I nodded slowly. "So you believe the taxes are unpaid?" "Yes," they said in unison. And you believe the county is preparing to auction the farmhouse? Again, they nodded. And you expect me to sign ownership documents today so you can liquidate the property immediately? It's the only option, Marcus insisted. I reached for my canvas tote bag beside the chair. Well then, I said, let me show you something. Both of them stiffened. Jenna took a small step back. I pulled out the official letter from the county assessor and laid it gently on the table. What's this? She asked. Read it, I said. Marcus scanned the letter first. His face went pale. Jenna grabbed it from him, her fingers trembling. No, this can't be right. It's very right, I replied. Every tax bill is paid in full. As of 3 weeks ago. Marcus looked stunned. You paid it? I did. But why? Jenna demanded. Why wouldn't you tell us? Why wouldn't you ask us to contribute? I did ask, I said gently. 4 years. Neither of you responded. And when the debt began accumulating due to misrouted notices, I took action because the house matters to me. It always has. Jenna looked furious, but beneath the fury, I could see something else: guilt, confusion, the prickling awareness of their own negligence. You went behind our backs, she said accusingly. No, I said calmly. I went ahead of your neglect. The room fell silent. I continued, and I have the receipts for every payment made over the last decade. Including the years you skipped. Marcus rubbed his forehead. We didn't mean. I know, I said. That's the problem. You didn't mean to handle anything. You meant to inherit something without maintaining it. Their arguments evaporated. Their faces tightened. The reality was settling in. And then, as they absorbed the truth, I added the final piece. If you intend to sell this house, understand this: I now hold the majority of the financial contribution to its preservation. Which means I have legal leverage you cannot ignore. Jenna stared at me, her confidence dissolving. Marcus whispered, what does that mean? It means, I said softly, that the house isn't leaving this family. Not today. Not ever. And certainly not because you forgot to pay a bill. But that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of what they would learn. I let the silence linger as they sat on the sagging floral sofa, reeling from the revelation. It wasn't my goal to shame them. I simply wanted them to understand the truth: inheritance is a responsibility, not a windfall. But there was more they needed to know. I retrieved a second folder from my tote bag, the one labeled Legal Document Review. I spoke with a real estate attorney last week, I said. Jenna stiffened. Why would you do that? Because I suspected something like this might happen, I replied. Your sudden urgency about the jewelry. Your abrupt demand to meet. And the tone of your messages. Marcus swallowed. What did the attorney say? That because I've paid the overwhelming majority of the property's expenses for more than 10 years, I explained, I have the right to seek reimbursement from both of you. With interest. Jenna's mouth fell open. You wouldn't, she breathed. I could, I said calmly. And legally, I would win. They looked at each other, panic slowly creeping into their expressions. But that isn't why I called the attorney, I continued. I wanted to understand something else. I placed another document on the table. It was a copy of Grandma's will. You might not remember this, I said, but Grandma wrote that the house should remain in the family as long as it is cherished. So? Jenna challenged. So, I said, legally, that phrasing gives me the right to contest any attempt to sell if I can demonstrate that you two have not upheld your share of the responsibilities. Marcus blinked. That's real? Very real, I replied. And extremely common in older wills. Jenna's voice was thin. So you're saying you can block the sale? Yes, I said. On multiple grounds. She leaned back, overwhelmed. I could see the scenario unraveling behind her eyes, the imagined quick cash sale, the relief from debt, the ability to start fresh. But fantasy dissolves in the face of truth. And there's more, I added gently. Do you know what happens when someone fails to pay taxes on jointly owned property? They shook their heads. The other co-owners gain grounds for claiming a larger share of ownership. It's called adverse contribution. You left the property at risk of foreclosure. I saved it. The realization hit them slowly, painfully. You mean, Marcus whispered, you could own more of it now? I could petition for that, I said. And with the evidence I've collected, the court would likely grant it. Jenna buried her face in her hands. I continued, but I'm not interested in stripping you of ownership. I'm interested in teaching you accountability. Jenna looked up, eyes glistening. We messed up. Yes, I said. But that's not unforgivable. Marcus exhaled shakily. What do you want from us? The question hung in the air. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. About correcting imbalances that had festered too long. About ensuring they understood the gravity of their actions. I want you to learn, I said softly. To grow. To respect the legacy you inherited. Jenna nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay. But I could tell they didn't fully grasp what was coming. Because before forgiveness comes truth. And the full truth was still unfolding. What I revealed next would change the way they saw the farmhouse, and me, forever. We moved into the dining room, where the evening light streamed through the lace curtains in warm gold stripes. I asked them to sit, and for once, they obeyed without resistance. This house, I began, is more than an inheritance. It's our history. But history only lives when it's maintained. You've both neglected your responsibilities. And that neglect nearly cost us everything. Jenna nodded, subdued. Marcus looked deeply ashamed. But more than the taxes, I continued, there's something far more important that neither of you knew about. I reached into my tote and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, the last ledger my grandmother ever kept. This is Grandma's final record book, I said. Jenna's breath caught. I thought this was lost. No, I said. She entrusted it to me before she passed. I opened to the final entry, written in Margaret's looping handwriting. The house is for Evelyn. She has been its steward. She understands its soul. The others may share in its legacy, but she is the caretaker. Jenna gasped. Marcus leaned forward. Does this change the will? No, I said. The will stands. But her intent is clear. She expected me to lead. And she expected you two to follow, with respect, not entitlement. I let that sink in before continuing. When you demanded I sign over the house for sale, you weren't just ignoring my rights. You were violating her wishes. Jenna whispered, we didn't know. Because you never asked, I replied. You assumed. Marcus swallowed hard. We're sorry, Aunt Ev. I nodded. I believe you. But apologies aren't enough. They looked up, startled. It's time for responsibility, I said. From this moment forward, if you want to remain co-owners, you will participate in the upkeep. Financially and physically. Jenna frowned. What does that mean exactly? It means, I said, you will pay your share of future taxes. You will help with repairs. You will visit the house at least twice a year. And you will treat this place as something valuable, not something to be liquidated when life gets hard. Marcus nodded. We can do that. Jenna hesitated. What if we don't? I met her gaze. Then I file for majority ownership based on financial contribution and stewardship. And the house becomes mine alone. The weight of my words settled over them like dust in an old attic. This wasn't punishment. It was clarity. The jewelry, I added, can stay with you both. Consider it a reminder. But the house stays in the family. Fully. Respectfully. Jenna looked down at the pearls draped across her fingers. Marcus stared at the sapphire ring in his palm. They were beginning to see the difference between objects and heritage. The confrontation wasn't dramatic. No yelling, no slammed doors. Just truth laid bare, calmly and irrevocably, exactly the way ethical justice should be delivered. At last, Jenna whispered, "We'll do better." "I know," I said. "But confrontation ends nothing. It only sets the stage for consequences. And consequences, as they would soon learn, come in many forms." Because I had one more revelation, one that would redefine everything they thought they knew about their grandmother's legacy. After the confrontation, the atmosphere shifted. The hostility and entitlement that had clouded the room earlier evaporated, replaced by something quieter, humility. But the story wasn't finished yet. There was still one final consequence they needed to understand. I motioned for them to join me on the back porch, where the view stretched across the 5 acres Grandma had adored. The sun was sinking low, setting the fields ablaze with amber light. "This land," I began, "is more valuable than you think." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "Last year," I said, "the state designated this area as part of a conservation corridor. Properties with historical roots and ecological significance are eligible for preservation grants." Jenna blinked. "What does that mean for the house?" "It means," I said, "that the land is now worth far more than its face value. And selling it, even if we all agreed, would require state approval. Approval that is rarely granted." Marcus stared at me. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it," I said gently. "You were thinking in terms of quick money, not long-term value." Jenna swallowed. "So, what happens now?" "What happens," I replied, "is that we take care of it. Together." I explained the grant opportunities, the tax incentives, the potential for restoring the old barn into a community workshop or historical exhibit. I shared the blueprint I had drafted for sustainable land stewardship. The more I talked, the more their expressions changed, from confusion to astonishment to cautious excitement. "You've done all this planning?" Marcus asked. "For 3 years," I said. Jenna whispered, "Grandma would be so proud." But I wasn't finished. "However," I added, "your lack of responsibility has consequences. So here is what we're going to do." They braced themselves. "You will reimburse me for your portion of last year's taxes. Not as punishment, but as ownership. And you will sign a co-stewardship agreement that legally binds each of us to our duties. If anyone fails their responsibilities for 2 consecutive years, their share reverts to the others." Jenna nodded slowly. "That's fair." Marcus exhaled in relief. "More than fair." Then I pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to them. "What's this?" Jenna asked. "Grandma wrote it shortly before she passed," I said. "She asked me to give it to you both when the time felt right." Their hands trembled as they opened it. Inside were 2 handwritten letters, one for each of them. I stepped inside to give them privacy. From the kitchen window, I saw their faces change as they read. First confusion. Then emotion. Then tears. Later, Jenna came in first. Her voice was soft, raw. She said she believed we'd grow into better people. Marcus followed, eyes red. "She said to listen to you. To learn from you. That you were the compass of the family." I placed a hand on the counter to steady myself. Her faith in me was overwhelming even now. "There's one more consequence," I said quietly. "But this one is a gift." They looked at me, apprehensive. "I registered the farmhouse as a historical family property," I said. "Which means it stays in the Hart family line permanently. None of us can sell it. Ever." Jenna exhaled shakily. "So it really stays with us?" "Yes," I said. "As long as you cherish it." The sun dipped below the horizon, and for the first time in years, I felt the family settling back into its rightful shape, not perfect, not frictionless, but honest. Yet even now, one final moment remained. A moment of reflection, of closure, where past and future meet. That night, after Jenna and Marcus had gone, I sat alone in the farmhouse kitchen. The air was still, the same stillness I'd known as a child at this table, eating warm apple pie while Grandma hummed softly. I ran my hand across the wood grain. It carried decades of memory, scratches from late-night card games, faint stains from homework assignments, a little knot in the surface where Grandpa had accidentally dropped a hammer. This house had lived. Truly lived. And now it would continue to live. My niece and nephew returned early the next morning, not to argue, but to work. Together we cleaned the attic, swept the porch, and repaired loose fence boards. They listened, asked questions, showed real interest. Transformation doesn't happen in a single moment. But accountability begins with a single choice. Before they left, Jenna hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry we treated you like you didn't matter," she said. "You mattered enough for Grandma to trust you," Marcus added. "And we're finally seeing why." I smiled softly. Growth often begins with discomfort. Over the next weeks, they followed through. Payments arrived on time. Emails came with photos of repairs they planned to contribute to. There were even conversations about future family gatherings on the property, memories they wanted to build, not sell. The house felt different now. Lighter. Justice, I've learned, is not always about retribution. Sometimes it's about restoration, of truth, of respect, of balance. And revenge? Revenge can be quiet. It can be ethical. It can be nothing more than revealing the truth at exactly the right moment. The real victory wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in teaching them how to be right. As I locked the farmhouse door that evening, I stepped onto the porch and breathed in the night air. A great horned owl called from the woods, deep, resonant, timeless. I felt grounded, anchored to the land that had carried my family for generations. This was justice. This was closure. This was legacy. Before I left, I turned to the silent house and whispered, "They're learning, Grandma. Just like you hoped." And I felt, no, I knew, that somewhere in the quiet, she was proud. Now I'll leave you with the same thought I carry with me. Family doesn't fall apart because of conflict. It falls apart because of silence. Speak truth. Stand firm. And protect what matters with calm conviction. If you'd like another story like this, another tale of ethical revenge, family revelation, and calm confrontation, I'd be glad to write it. What title should I create next?